Tonight's presenter is Jim Armbruster, research coordinator with the Vermont Institute of Natural Sciences, and he is going to tell us about some exciting hawk research. If you have a question, please feel free to use the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and I'm sure we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you all, and thanks for all the notes where to go find birds down your way. So I'll have to check some of those spots out. Like Corey said, my name is Jim. I'm a field research coordinator at the Vermont Institute of Natural Science, or VINS for short. And I always like to start off my presentations by asking how many people have been to VINS before, and they all raise their hands, but I can only see like 4 of you on the screen. So I'm going to assume that you've all been to VINS before and you've all seen all the cool things that are going on. But for those of you who haven't, or even if you have, I'll just kind of briefly talk about our history as an organization, some of the other departments and what they're doing, and then an overview of the research department, and then really focusing in on the winter raptor ecology project. So can everyone see my screen and the little laser pointer thing? Okay, cool. I'm going to try and point to things as we go. But for now, we'll just go ahead, and I've got a video to show you our campus. In case you've never been before. Nope, I got everything's all screwed up here. Hang on. Can't use the laser pointer. All right. Here we go. So this is from the fall, a drone video of our campus. Our new highlighted exhibit is the canopy walk, which you can see right there through the trees. That's the tower off to your left-hand side of your screen, the spider's web to your right. And it's an elevated walkway that goes through the trees and above the trees in some places. And you get a beautiful view out over the river and Dewey's Pond. We have about 30 or so exhibits that have raptors that you would see in Vermont, some species you might not see in Vermont. They're all housed in that horseshoe-shaped enclosures there. We've got a program space, a meadow, our bird muse with that solar panel on top, and then out into the meadow. So that's kind of our campus and the things you can see while you're there. This is more what it looks like nowadays with all the snow, although there's no snow in this picture, but the pond is frozen over. This is a view out of the canopy walk of, you can see the Artic River right there in the front, and then Dewey's Pond out in the background there. And so VINS is an organization we were founded back in 1972 by a group of people who are concerned with the health of that river, the Artic River. Nowadays is a great place to see. It's a tourist attraction. It flows from Killington through Quechee and empties into the Connecticut. It actually goes around our campus, as you saw there. In the 70s, though, there were no regulations protecting that river. So towns like Woodstock, a town just west of us, was actually dumping raw sewage into the water. And this group of concerned people who like to recreate could not recreate in the river because there's raw sewage in the river. That's really nasty. And they actually had to sue the town of Woodstock to get them to comply with Vermont's clean water laws. And they realized that either there was no education, these people didn't understand why that's a bad thing, or they just didn't care. And so our mission from that was to motivate people to care about the environment. And we do that today through education, research, and then our avian and wildlife rehabilitation. Education is probably the easiest part of our mission. We have on-site programs throughout the summer. We do 4 programs a day. In the winter, we're down to 1, and it's on the weekends. But we use live avian ambassadors in our programs, so hawks and falcons and owls. And we really inspire people to care about the environment by showing them and teaching them with these live animals. We have some reptiles too. But we're really known as the bird place. And so if you come to our nature center, you might see things like our Harris's hawk flying over your heads. He can tickle your head as he goes by with his wingtips there. He doesn't crash into people. He's never done that. But he's a bird you wouldn't see in Vermont, but he can do some really incredible things along with our other species who are native to Vermont and the state. So we also have educators in local schools in the Upper Valley, and they enhance the STEM programs in those schools. So we do a lot of education. A lot of what we do feeds into that education. So all of my research and things that we do, the projects, we try and feed that right back into our education to say, this is what we know about raptors, and this is how you can learn about them from our ambassadors. The other part of our mission, the avian wildlife rehabilitation, is a fancy way of saying we have a bird hospital on our campus. People know to bring us their injured, ill birds, and the goal is to get them happy, healthy, and back out into the wild. And we used to say that on an average year, we would see between 300 and 500 patients. That number is out of date because, as you can see, in 2018, 2019, we've had just exponential growth in the number of patients that we have been seeing. So 2018, we surpassed 600, almost got to 700. 2019, we did pass 700. 2020, we had over 1,000 patients. And as you can see in the bottom corner there, we had 1,083 as of 12/17. We actually got up to 1,090 and maybe a little bit extra in the year 2021. And so we're wondering, why is that? We actually have a statistician crunching the numbers and trying to figure out if there's any trends into why we're seeing so many injured birds. One theory is that with the COVID pandemic, people were not going to work, they were quarantining, they were trying to be happy and safe and healthy outside. Maybe they were interacting with wildlife more than they normally would, and they were finding these injured birds. We're hoping that it's not that more birds are getting injured, but that very well could be the case, that there's just a lot of more human-caused injuries. We're really trying to dissect that trend and see what might be happening. And of course, with global warming, climate change, that could just continue to be the normal for us, and we could see these birds just increasing. But on the bright side, we have about a 40% success rate when it comes to rehabbing those birds and getting them back out into the wild. And I know that doesn't sound great if you're thinking in terms of human medicine, a 4 in 10 chance of getting out of a hospital alive, not very good odds for people. But for our birds, it's actually the higher side of the national average for releases, and we're really proud of that number. So the rehab staff, incredibly busy over there. I did a brief term in the rehab department, and these are some of the interesting birds that came through when I was there, just to give you kind of an idea of what we see. We'll take anything from the little tiny hummingbirds all the way up to the injured hawks, owls, eagles, things like that. So in the top left corner, you can see this was an imprinted Canada goose. So this goose thought it was a human. It was allowed to wander the halls of rehab. It would follow us around. It would honk at us. It was great. That bird could not be out in the wild, so we actually had to set into a rehabber who has a whole flock of imprinted Canada geese. I guess they follow her around and chase her around, and it's a whole lot of fun up that way. So that goose was there. This is a great blue heron. These birds, for whatever reason, when they come into rehab, they're not doing well, and a lot of them don't survive the rehab process. So this bird that came in was not looking great, but it actually ended up being able to be released. And this is actually just down the road from a nature center in Heartland. This great blue heron was released. So not a lot of times we get to do that with those types of birds, just because of the types of their injuries, they're malnourished. They don't always do so well. There's a great horned owl. We've had a lot of great horned owls come in through our rehab. One of the ones that we had when I was there was from the Woodstock treatment plant, so the sewage treatment plant. He had crashed into a fence, kind of rolled in some poop, it seemed like, and was not in such great shape. Nothing obvious was found on an exam, but he was with us for a little while, and we released him back out shortly thereafter. This is a bittern, I believe. It's hard to tell from that picture. We've had bald eagles. Bald eagles are always a crowd favorite. We get in several every year. This one is an adult, did well, was released. Little tiny kestrel, right? Little small falcon. At one point, we had like 10 of them in care. We had a little army of kestrels that we were taking care of. They're quite ferocious. They will draw blood, even though they've got those tiny little talons. And then all the assorted songbirds from, this is a catbird, common yellow throat. I believe there's a yellow warbler thrown in there. And I think that's a phoebe sitting in the middle. So we'll see all those birds, and the idea is to get them back out into the wild. A couple more good release photos. These are some wood ducks released on our campus, a red-tailed hawk, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. This is a great horned owl being flight tested, so you can see it's attached to a creance, that dangling line there, just letting it fly in an area where it has more room to get a good flight in, but not to fly off right before release. And then in the bottom, that's the heron coming out of the box on our nature center. So that's really what we're known for, that bird hospital. People bring us birds from all over the state, and we do the best to take care of them that we can.
Jim, there was a question in the chat. I'm wondering if there's a difference in what kinds of birds are brought in the last couple of years. Like,
that's a great question. Yeah. I don't know if there's been, it's kind of a steady, normal, we get in the spring, the baby birds, all the songbirds, and the winter we get the raptors. I don't know if there's been any obvious trends of like really different birds. We occasionally get like pelagic seabirds that are, we just had a northern gannet come through. So weird birds like that end up with us. And I mean, we've been seeing more of those random, weird, not Vermont birds more often recently, but I feel like overall it's kind of a normal trend of just normal Vermont birds. I can tell you, you didn't ask, but one of the questions is what's the most common bird we see in rehab? It's usually a barred owl. We have, our statistician was looking at barred owls specifically, since we've had records from all the way back when rehab opened, and he actually took weather data from Killington and looked at trends and saw that rainy, kind of not cold winters, but that freeze thaw winter, we have more barred owls that come in because they're trying to break through the snow and they can't get through that icy layer. So we are seeing trends of barred owls, and they can actually be correlated to the weather. So I'm sure other species we could do that correlation to. We just haven't done that yet. Kind of a long way to answer that question, but yeah, that's a good one. And so the last part of that mission is the research. So I'm the field research coordinator. That's my domain. We've had research as our mission since our founding. We actually had a conservation biology department. A lot of interesting, great projects started with VINS. The Breeding Bird Atlas of Vermont was a VINS project at first. The Bicknell's Thrush project up on Mount Mansfield started at VINS. And the loon monitoring actually started as a VINS project. And around 2004, we moved to Quechee. That staff actually broke off and they founded the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. So you've probably heard of their work. They're still doing great stuff. And all those projects they're still in charge of and they're managing. But we kind of lost that research aspect of our mission. And so we turned to citizen science, now community science, and we were focusing on projects that anybody could do in your backyards. You didn't need to have that background in science. You could still be contributing, and that really tied into our educational mission. A few years ago, though, we looked at our research and we really wanted to bulk it back up and not get to the Vermont Center for Eco Studies standard, but kind of do those projects that require some more skill and work with the birds. And we have a lot of background in that. And so that's kind of where this department came out of. And we've played around with our own little mission statement with inside the VINS organization. And you can see there, it's engaging the community in environmental conservation by increasing knowledge of the natural world through field studies and collaboration with like-minded organizations. So a lot of our projects, we really tie into that education. We also look to see how we can share our knowledge with other organizations that are similar to what we're doing. And so a lot of our projects have come out of that collaboration. You actually had a presentation with Caitlin McDonald from Dartmouth. She actually contacted us to do a project. And so that kind of collaboration is what we're really looking for in these projects. Just a quick overview of the department itself. It's me, myself, and I right now. It's a small department. We do have a part-time winter intern. She's out doing the winter raptor ecology project, but we're really a small organization. We're trying to grow and see what we can do and add more projects. But we rely on our volunteers. You can see we've had an increase in the last few years. A lot of community science projects. We have about 16 of them, 9 VIN specific types of projects, and then 14 partner organizations. We're always growing that number and looking how we can contribute. That picture, for those of you that don't know, that's a rusty crayfish. That's an invasive species up in the White River. That's one of our projects. We're actually helping the White River Partnership look at the spread of rusty crayfish in their watershed, and also we're going to look at the artic this summer, hopefully do an inventory. If any of these projects that I'm speaking of that I don't cover and you're interested in, feel free to ask first of all if you're interested, but also you can go to our website. We're trying to keep it updated with all the stuff that we're doing. And we try and keep our blog updated with field notes from our current projects. So like the Winter Raptor Ecology Project will have blog posts to keep people up to date with what's going on. Really a quick rundown of everything we're doing, and then I'll get into that Winter Raptor Ecology Project in detail. So these are some of the community science projects we've been working on and participating in. Nest Watch is a Cornell project. We have a series of nest boxes throughout our campus that we routinely monitor. We also know where all the birds like to nest on the buildings and crevices and things like that. So we'll monitor those nests throughout the season. iNaturalist is a good one that you can take a picture and it gives you an idea of what you're looking at in nature. Obviously, we use that almost every day, it seems like. eBird's a great one. Monarch Watch, we're actually going out and tagging monarch butterflies in our meadow. We put a little sticker on their wing, and the idea is when they migrate down to Mexico, if they make it that far and someone finds them, they can see that sticker and they know where they came from. And then Feeder Watch is going on right now, so anybody can participate in Feeder Watch and just count the birds at your feeder. So those are the projects that anybody can be involved in. this is a bluebird coming into one of our boxes. So we've had really good luck with bluebirds on our campus. We've had several broods throughout a summer. I think 2 last year. They go back to the same box, and so we keep an eye on that. And again, you can do that at home. We added a bunch of those types of projects, that crayfish index I mentioned. We're getting back to our roots with water quality monitoring with the Ottauquechee Natural Resources Conservation District. We're going out and sampling stream locations. We're trying to get a hawk watch site up and running at Mount Escutney. It's kind of down your way. It's nowhere near Putney or Packman-Adnock. Don't get excited, but there are some birds that are moving through, and we're trying to staff that and get people out there because it's really fun to go out and watch hawks in the fall, and Putney's a drive for us, so Escutney's a little closer, and there's good movement there. So we're looking to staff that more next season. The Firefly Watch is something that with Mass Audubon and all the other Audubons you can see there and other organizations, and we're looking to do programming, how you can count fireflies and identify them in your backyard and use that data to submit to their project. The Dragonfly Detective Project with Black River Action Team was they actually came to our campus looking for dragonflies in our meadow and on our canopy walk. We actually found some on the canopy walk, which is pretty exciting. And they looked for Exuviae, the exoskeleton shed down by Dewey's Pond, and then all the other projects you can see. So we're really trying to keep those projects and anybody can get involved in them. But then we're really looking at also things that we can do as a nature center. This is another one too. This is amphibian crossings in the springtime. We adopted a road near us and we went out and we moved peepers and salamanders across the road. So a lot of fun. Anyone can be involved in those things, and it's a lot of great science that it comes out of it and a lot of data. For VINS specifically though, things that aren't necessarily community science projects, we have a game camera survey on our campus. You can see this coyote that came onto campus in the winter. We're monitoring all the species on our properties in Quechee and in Washington, Vermont at Old Pepper Place. And we've seen everything on VINS campus from gray foxes to red foxes to coyotes to bears to fisher to ermine. A lot of cool things that we wouldn't really expect in such a well-traveled area. We've done breeding bird surveys on our properties the last 2 years. A lot of interesting data came out of that. Audio recording, we're actually putting out microphones in the spring and recording songs of birds as they come back in the springtime, and also recording nocturnal flight calls. So as birds migrate in the spring and fall, we have a specifically designed microphone that points up into the air and records their cheep calls as they go by, their seep calls as they go overhead. And you can actually identify them down to species. I'm not very good at that yet, but you can get an idea of when these birds are moving. And we've seen big nights just by the number of calls that are recorded. We'll talk in detail about the Winter Raptor Ecology Project, the Tick Ecology Project. For those of you that saw Caitlin, that was a really interesting project. I have a slide in a little bit talking a little bit more about it, not too in detail. And then down at the bottom, you can see the blood parasites and the banning of rehab patients. There's West Nile virus and grouse and the loons. Those are rehab projects that our rehab staff are participating in, where they're actually helping with the loons in particular, looking at fatalities and what's causing that. A lot of lead has been found, and we're working with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies to really look at what's causing these loon fatalities, looking at West Nile virus and grouse that come in, and then banning patients as we're releasing them to get an idea of if they're surviving and where they're going, and then looking at blood parasites in all these different species of bird, because they come into our rehab, we draw blood, and so we have this database that we can use and share with other organizations. These are some of the results from our breeding bird survey, just because people like birds and there's a lot of cool ones on our property. You can see this is from Old Pepper Place up in Washington. The most abundant bird was an ovenbird, which is a little surprising, but not too surprising, I guess. Then followed by red-eyed vireo, then a yellow-bellied sapsucker, black-throated blue warblers, chickadees. So we had the whole lot of species. You can see we had 57 species on that one property during that period, that one day we surveyed. And then on our VINS campus, the most abundant was a red-eyed vireo, present in all of our plots, down to those really small black-capped chickadees, veeries, red stars, robins, song sparrows. So a lot of unique birds on our properties, and we monitor those as well. For turtle monitoring, VINS has always been a place where snapping turtles lay their eggs. It's the sandy soil they like, so they'll actually come out of the Ottauquechee River, they'll crawl up through the forest, and they'll lay their eggs all over campus. So in spring, people are dodging turtles as they're walking by. And we were wondering how many turtles we have on our property and how old these turtles were and how successful they were. And so the idea was, well, let's mark them. So we're actually notching their shells and seeing if they come back next year and getting an idea of how old they are, how successful they are. Last season was the first season. We had about 6 turtles we managed to find. We'd let them lay their eggs. They'd be going back to the river. We'd catch them up, we'd weigh them, we'd measure them, we'd mark them. And so next season, we'll see how many come back and how many are on our campus. This is Caitlin's study that she talked about in detail at one of your last meetings. Really quickly, we're looking at how mesopredators like coyotes and foxes influence small mammal populations and how those in turn affect tick populations. So to do that, we live trap small mammals. You can see a flying squirrel, a white-footed mouse, counted ticks on those animals, counted ticks on the cloth after you did a drag through the woods. And she's looking at all that information and seeing how that affects those tick populations. We also have a kestrel monitoring network of boxes throughout the Upper Valley, where people adopt a box, they put it up, they monitor it throughout the spring, and if it's successful, we go out and we band those nestlings before they fledge the nest. We have over 30 boxes. Last season, we had, I think, 36 young were banded. Boxes were really sketchy. This one, you can see that ladder is just as sketchy as it looks. I climbed up it, got the birds out. I went to pass them down to the landowner. He was climbing the ladder behind me. The whole ladder shifted to the right and I almost fell out of the tree. So not the safest thing in the world, but we got a nest full of birds out of that and they got banded. So a lot of these cute pictures, the little dinosaurs here. You know, this is what the birds were ideally trying to find, these younger birds. This is an older bird that was banded, but looking to expand that for the Upper Valley and really add to the population and monitor that as well. And then really quick, speaking of snowy owls, we thought we'd have a good year this season. We had actually 3 come through our rehab at the beginning of the season, and it's kind of trickled out since then. But we contacted Project Snowstorm and said, hey, we have these birds coming into our rehab. Is there any information you'd like from them? And since we had them in hand, they said, sure, whatever you can give us, blood, feathers, information as to why they're in rehab. If they don't make it, which unfortunately 2 of them did not make it, send us the bodies and we'll do necropsies. So any other snowy owls that come in, we will get all that information and send it their way. One of the birds was released up in Addison County, so 1 did make it. And it really did seem like it was going to be a good start to the snowy owl season. They told us there was robust breeding across their range and they expect a decent year for juvenile birds. And it's not been an eruptive year, I'd say, but there's definitely been reports around like the one down your way. So just another interesting thing that we're doing in our rehab department. So that's kind of the whirlwind tour of VINS, the department itself, and then we'll get into the winter raptor ecology project. And I guess this is a good time to stop if there are any more questions. Otherwise, I can just keep on cruising through.
Jim, there was a question in the chat. Somebody wanted to know how it is that you have a Harris's hawk and what injury placed it at VINS.
Yes, good catch. That's not a native bird. If you do see one in Vermont, give us a call. It's probably our bird flying loose. They've done that a couple times. We, as an organization, we have several uninjured birds that we use in our programs to show what an uninjured bird can do. We trust the bird to fly, demonstrate different skills and behaviors it learns. Whereas most of our ambassadors are injured birds through our rehab. So we are trying to move away from that practice of using injured birds. It ends up being better for the birds if they're captive bred, especially owls. Wild owls don't make great ambassador birds. So that Harris's hawk, his name is Chesterland. He's from Chesterland, Ohio, so he's never seen the desert a day in his life. But he is a captive bred bird, bred for falconry actually, purchased by a falconer and then donated to us to be an ambassador bird. Also a great way to talk about Harris's hawks, a species you wouldn't see here in Vermont, and talk about those adaptations as to how they survive in the desert. So that's Chesterland's story for you. That's how we came to acquire him. He's actually, he's probably 19 years old now. He's a fairly old bird. And he is the star of the show. Don't get me wrong. You go to any VINS program, he will show off for you. So quite the crowd pleaser. Cool. Yeah, I'll continue on then. So the Winter Raptor Ecology Project, was born out of a conversation between myself and one of our volunteer banders and one of our board members. And we were looking at how we could really get back into the research world and use our knowledge of birds, our work with birds, and how we can contribute to ongoing projects and knowledge in the state, and how they could all feed into our educational programs. And so the idea was that these two banders have been out in Addison County, Vermont, and they've been banding raptors for several years now, but they haven't been getting return data. It's something that sometimes happens in these projects where you band and band and band, and you don't get the return data. And so wondering, okay, well, how can we get more information from these birds? We know that Addison County is a hot spot in the state. Raptors hang out there. Why is that? Where are they coming from? Where are they going? And things like that. So we decided to then track these birds and see where they're going and get more information from them. Whereas the band return might not come back in. You might not get that information from these birds. And so with that, we focused on red-tailed hawks, and a pretty common species, right? A very iconic species. Here's that release bird from earlier, soaring up nice and high with that nice red tail. But a bird that a lot of people know a lot about already. It's a fairly common species, but there's still always more that we can learn from these birds. And so the goals of this project were, one, to get some movement data on these birds. Where are they going? Where are they coming from? Why are they choosing Addison County, Vermont? We have ideas as to why that is, and where they might be going, but really trying to really hone in on what's going on. How these birds are using the habitat during winter. Where are they going if there's a snowstorm, if it's icy, if it's windy? Are there things that like that are affecting those movements of these birds? So you can see factors that influence their movements, how these conspecifics interact, so how these same species interact, how they interact with other species like rough-legged hawks, how juveniles and adults interact, who's moving, where are they moving to, and then to really quantify, well, what's a good year in the county? There's not a whole lot of information as to, you know, yeah, it's a great year for birds. Okay, well, what was it compared to last year? And so we're doing some standardized survey routes. So to start off with red-tailed hawks, you probably know a lot about these birds. I'll kind of give a quick recap of the species. So they are considered a partial migratory species. We already know that they do move around. They come from Canada, they come south from Vermont, they might move farther south from our state, and they might leapfrog as they go. They might be year-round residents. It depends on the bird, the individual, where they're moving to and how they're moving and why they're moving. If the birds do leave the state, they do return around February, and most of them are back by March. And there's actually 14 subspecies of red-tailed hawk. So I always say that the most common hawk in North America, the East Coast, West Coast, you're going to see a red-tailed hawk. Well, you might be seeing different subspecies. And that's not something I really thought about until we really focused in on this project. And we partnered with the Red-tailed Hawk Project to really think about those subspecies of red-tailed hawk. Two of those subspecies are common in Vermont, so the eastern and the northern, and I'll talk more about those two. And you can see they've decreased by 8% during the last couple surveys throughout the state, which is typical of a lot of species. Not to be doom and gloom, but we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 30 or so years. It's not looking great for some of these species, and red tails, like a lot of others, are declining. But with that, there are these subspecies that we do see them a lot in Vermont. We're a pretty common bird, luckily. So this is the eastern subspecies, right? The borealis, the one that we're most familiar with thinking of a red-tailed hawk. This is probably what you picture, right? That lighter colored bird underneath, kind of a cream color. You can see, let me see if I do the highlighter again. You can really see the belly band here, a nice belly band, but a lighter bird overall, a little bit of color in the shoulders and the neck there. And of course, that distinctive red tail, which they don't have as a juvenile bird. About 2 years old, they'll molt all their feathers and they'll grow in that nice definitive red tail. But this is kind of the iconic bird we think of in Vermont. We think of that red-tailed hawk. But there are also others, and especially in the wintertime, we start to see more of these abieticolas, right? So the northern subspecies of red tail, and you can see pretty striking differences, right? A darker bird overall, with a really, really thick defined belly band, and there's some drippings from the neck into the shoulders that make this the abieticola, the northern subspecies of birds. We often get birds that are right on the edge, though. They're intermediate. They're either hybrids or you're interbreeding, because subspecies are not necessarily a definitive guide. It's based on plumages and opinions, but they're really not any hard and fast rules for what a subspecies might be and what they look like. And I'll mention one more. I know I said two are common, but there's also the Western subspecies. And actually last year there was a recorded photo in Charlotte of a really, really dark presumed Western subspecies of red-tailed hawk, like an almost black bird. Still has that red tail though, but a really, really dark bird overall. And it was confirmed up in Charlotte. There was, this season, there was a report of a Harlan's red-tailed hawk, which is another subspecies out of Middlebury. We were up there that day. We didn't have a chance to go look and see if it was up there. That's another subspecies that might pop up in the area. I don't think that one was confirmed. It was just one report that I saw. So those are the birds, the first two, the northern and the eastern, that you'd be looking for in Vermont. If you see one of these, definitely take a picture and record it, because that may be a possibility. I mentioned the Red-tailed Hawk Project earlier, and this is actually some of his work out west, I believe, Kansas. And you can just see the amount of variation in red-tailed hawk plumage. They're quite a unique bird. They're beautiful birds, and you really get up close and look at them. He's got, the darker bird down in the corner, some darker birds here, some really, really light birds up in here, like almost a white bird right there. So just a lot of interesting variation in their plumage. And it's more than just, oh, it's just a red-tailed hawk. So I've been looking closer at all the red-tailed hawks that I see to really try and pick and decipher what subspecies they might be, based on, the work we've done with them in the state. I'll give a quick overview of Bryce Robinson's project. He was a partner in our first year, a collaborator. His project is really looking at those subspecies and linking them to breeding locations. So he really wants to know the plumage, the characteristics. He got blood from them to really see if there's how these birds relate, how they correlate, where these birds are, and if there's anything genetic that can really show that these birds are unique. And so you can see his long objective there, but basically that's what he's looking at, the subspecies and where they're breeding. And this is a map that he actually just released fairly recently from all of his data. He's gone all over the United States looking at these birds. He's gone south into Mexico looking at these birds and following them up throughout their ranges. And you can see all these subspecies and where they're presumed to be breeding. So the Borealis, that eastern, is a big chunk of the United States here. Vermont's right in the middle of it. And then Abieticola is presumed to breed a little bit north of us. So you can see that green line there. And then all the other subspecies, he's kind of looking to where they're breeding and starting to link them to where they're actually breeding at. So a really cool map that he just put out fairly recently. For our effort, though, our project, we're actually limiting it to Addison County. And it looked like you had a presentation from the manager, Dead Creek, a few presentations back. So you might have had an intro to the history and how unique the location is, and the background on that. But you can see, just looking at the map, right, it's agriculture, it's fields. It's very different than, you can see the line, right? As you come over the mountains, you dip down and you cross into farmland, you can really see that definitive line. So this is like perfect red-tailed hawk habitat, that farmland, those trees interspersed. And so we limited our study to Addison County, just to see why this is such a unique place in the state. A lot of our birds end up coming from right in the middle here. So Addison, Bridport, Middlebury, a lot of the birds tend to hang out in this area here, but you can just still see it's all unique throughout the entire area. And it's got views like this, right? So wide open field, there's a forest edge along here, the mountains in the background. This is in Middlebury. There's actually a river behind the road here on the other side of the camera. And when it's a really good day, you can see sometimes 2 or 3 red tails just hanging out on the edge of the field here in the trees, just staring at you like, what are you doing? So those are really good days out in the field to see all those red tails. Another look, a different part of the county. This is up north. Those are the mountains of New York across the lake. Again, nice open field, lots of perching on the telephone wires here, the trees interspersed out in the background, the little patch of trees over here. And then again, one more look, just, farmland, as far as you can see, all these trees, perfect red-tailed habitat. So to start off our project every season, we try and go out and start doing roadside surveys to one, get an idea of where the birds are hanging out to help with our trapping expeditions, and also to see when the birds start coming back, because you'll see a noticeable difference between the beginning of the winter and the middle of winter, the number of birds you have in the area. When we start seeing 2 or 3 red tails hanging out in a tree together, we think, okay, it's a good time. There's a lot of birds that are probably back and set up for the winter. We can start trapping these birds now. And these are some of the results from our survey, kind of the first few days of the last season. All these red dots correlate to a red-tailed hawk. So they're all over. You can start to see the roads where they're really hanging out on across the county. These yellow spots interspersed here, those are birds we actually ended up trapping and putting either a color band on or a GPS unit on last season. So they're interspersed throughout the county as we were doing surveys. They fit in with everybody else. This is from this season. We're using a different app to see where the birds are. And you can see again, they're starting to form. These are the roads that they really like to hang out on. So when we go out for the day, these are the roads that we target for trapping our birds. And they're pretty uniformly scattered throughout the area. But there's definitely these really concentrated areas where these birds are. So from last season, we did get some analysis of our surveys in. A lot of this is preliminary data, so there's nothing that can really be said about the data, but we can make some assumptions about what we're seeing. And this is probably really small for a lot of you to see, but we do have 2 survey routes throughout Addison County. There's a larger route and a shorter route. And they do overlap in the middle, but they try and cover as much of the county as we can without driving all day. You can see at the top here, red-tailed hawks are the most cited species, which that's not surprising. They're the most common bird. By numbers, though, in Vermont, they're actually not the most common raptor. It's broadwings, but they're not here right now. So a lot of red tails cited throughout. Rough-legged hawks are the second most cited species, which is great if you like rough-legged hawks. They're a fun species. You can see that harriers were present, and then they sort of tapered off when there was snow cover on the fields, and then they came back when there was not as much snow cover. So nothing we can say about that, but just an interesting observation that they seem to be moving elsewhere when there's snow cover on the fields, which makes sense with the way they hunt. They do the quartering, they hover across the field. So they were probably going elsewhere when there was a lot of snow cover. Red-tailed hawks are more evenly distributed. So this map on the left is the hot spots of red-tailed hawks pretty much throughout the entire county. And rough-leggeds were more concentrated on the western side. You can see this map on the right here. They're kind of more towards the water. This bar chart, which you probably can't see at all, and I can barely see, red-tailed hawks were the most common. So that's the tallest graph here, tallest bar on the graph. Rough-legged hawks, this darker brown, you can see were more evenly distributed and more evenly observed throughout the period. And then harriers are in there, and then I think it's bald eagle at the bottom. So there's eagles around, and we see them occasionally. Speaking of bird sightings, my technician was out today survey, and she swears she saw a golden eagle. And so you never know, you might see a golden eagle out there. She did report it to eBird. She's got a pretty nice description of what she saw. So you never know what you'll see out in the county. So when we've done our surveys, we have an idea where the birds are hanging out and a good time to start the trapping. We use what's called a balchatry trap. It's hardware cloth. You can maybe barely see there's an inner cage and an outer cage, and there's a live mouse that sits in that cage. Thinking about raptors and how they catch their food, they use their feet, right? Thinking of raptors' talons. Raptor comes from the word rapere, which means to seize or grasp, right? That Latin word talking about their strong, gripping, crushing talons. And so they will land sometimes on the trap, sometimes they'll land next to the trap, they'll stomp up to it, and they'll reach out with their feet. Their feet are desensitized because that's what they're trapping and killing their food with. So they will hit the trap. You can see there's fishing line, makes little nooses around the top. And the idea is when they hit the trap with their foot and they go to pull back, that noose tightens on their foot, and you've got a bird, and the trap is heavy enough they can't fly away with the trap. They can definitely move it, and they will try and drag it as they try and get away, but they can't take off, luckily, with these traps on their feet. And so we drive down, we catch them, we put a towel over their head, We try and get the nooses off their feet when it's really cold in the middle of winter. Sometimes a Leatherman's nice to grab the fishing line because you can't feel the tips of your fingers. And you gently remove that fishing line from their talons to get the bird off the trap. And then you get the angry red-tailed hawk face because they're not happy about what's going on, obviously. This is one of the first birds we trapped. You can see it's a juvenile bird from last year. Got that stripy red-tailed hawk tail. And this is kind of one of those in-between birds, right? So Bryce was looking for one, an adult bird, but also a definitively northern bird. And this bird has got that dark belly band, but it's kind of a lighter bird overall. So it's kind of an in-between bird. Juvenile though, so it wouldn't get a transmitter anyway. But one of the first birds we ended up getting last season. We would put a hood on the bird, right, to keep them calm. If they can't see, then they're theoretically calmer. This is a falconry hood, so falconers are known to put hoods on their birds and have them in their car or on a perch, and it keeps them nice and calm. You can see it's already got some equipment on, but the first thing we would do is draw blood from these birds. So there we are getting a blood sample from the bird. Really cold, hard to manipulate your fingers, really hard to draw blood on a little tiny bird vein right across the wing there. But we draw blood. We put the bands on. You can see there's a color band on these birds. Bryce was looking for color bands to see if people saw these birds that weren't GPS collared or backpack GPS to see if they were resighted. So he found out pretty quick that the plastic, when it's cold, it snaps. He ended up snapping 2 or 3 bands before he figured out, oh, they're cold. We should probably keep them warm while we're doing this. So he put them on the vent. And then we had no problems when they were warm in the car. So USGS band there and a color band go on the bird. And then he was thinking about those subspecies and really trying to look at their plumage variation. So he had a standardized way of taking pictures. And so you can see the left wing underside, the left wing the backside, all on this whiteboard with the color palette in the bottom there to standardize all of his pictures. And so he'd get these really up close pictures of the bird, really looking at that plumage. This is again another bird that's, you know, kind of an intermediate. It's just lighter overall, but it does have a thicker, darker belly band. There's definitely some drippings into the neck. So there's some birds he was on the fence about putting a transmitter on. We eventually got him some birds that he was really happy with. But there's the backside, that nice, beautiful plumage, nice, beautiful red tail. And then taking a picture of the eyes, right? So there's some theories that the older the bird is, the darker their eyes get. So he's got some really nice shots of the eyes as well. And then a nice spread of that tail. And so this bird was one of the birds that either got a color band or a GPS on it and added to his study and our study as well. So kind of a dual purpose bird. This is another bird that we captured. Again, it's kind of that in between bird. It's could be a northern, but it's not definitively. Again, with this bird, really dark belly band, but really light overall. Darker head for sure. Some drippings there. This bird only got a color band, but here's a up close picture of that plumage, right? So nice belly band. And this is one of the last birds we caught. This is just an eastern bird. He said, you know what, let's put a color band on an eastern bird and see what happened to that bird. So lighter bird overall, a belly band, yes, not so much dripping in the neck, but a nice typical Vermont red-tailed hawk. This bird, oh, that's another picture of its wing outstretched. Nice picture of that tail again. The birds, though, that did get GPS on, so the next step would be to put that unit on. You can see there's some Teflon ribbon that's attached to the front of the bird here. It goes over the wings on both sides, obviously, under the wings, and then attaches in the front in the crimp. And I've got a better picture from Rough Legs where you can really see how the unit attaches. But putting it on, it's got the color band and the USGS band, and he's just fitting the bird to its to the backpack unit. Before they get released, we do a flight test. So you can see it's still got the ribbons hanging there. He didn't want to cut them until the unit was fully attached. He's demonstrating as a flapping bird as he's doing this. The idea is the bird will flap, make sure the backpack's fitted appropriately, doesn't impede the wing movement. It's not too tight, not too loose, and they can still fly with the unit on. This is the first bird, Goodrich, right before release. So a nice picture of the wing again. This is the second bird, Middlebury, trapped in Middlebury right before release. So these two birds did get GPS units on them last season. And of course, the big release, everyone loves slow-mo videos of birds being released. So here we go. That's Middlebury, right on Middlebury College. That's the football field, the gymnasium right there, mountains in the background. This bird was trapped right along the road, right outside the gymnasium, right by the golf course there. So we were not expecting to see a bird right there, but that's the bird we got, and then released right there into the field. And then really quickly, the units we're talking about. So these are GPS units. You can see there can be no more than 3% of the bird's body weight. So they're not so heavy that they're impeding flight, and they are with the bird for life. So they're attached so that they don't fall off. Hence the Teflon ribbon, the knots, and the crimping. What they do is they'll get GPS locations, and they're set to record continuously, and they send them over cell towers. So the unit has to be within distance of a cell tower to send that data to us. So it's intermittent sometimes when you're in Vermont and cell service. So it's the same with these transmitters. Sometimes you don't get information, sometimes you do. And so as soon as those birds were released, we started getting some information from them, both for Bryce's purposes and for our study. And so this is Goodrich, that first bird that I talked about. He was actually trapped right, you can see the road. He was trapped right along that road. We put the unit on right in the driveway here, and then we just released him, and he stayed right in this area. So this is December. It wasn't a full month of data, so you can see there's not a whole lot of points, but he really started to congregate and focus his activity right in this clump of trees and into these fields on either side of that road, the north and south side of the road. And so we actually have a year's worth of his data. So we'll go month by month, and you can see how it changes. That, January still kind of that same area. He's gone to these fields, and you can see both of these fields from the roads. It's not a huge distance that he's traveling. I think it's like 2 miles apart, these two fields, to the total distance. And so throughout the year, February, same thing. He's hanging out right in these clump of trees, and then interspersing his day out in the fields. And then here you go, really, really concentrated here, starting to grow his travels here and there. And then really, really congregates here in April, and then kind of a wider area. And then in May, he's gone even farther away and presumably hunting, looking for food. And he's crossed the river here, spent a little bit of time over here. But from this information, we can start to see this bird is going to stay in Vermont throughout the year. This is a resident bird, despite it being presumably a northern subspecies. We think it would go back to Canada in the summertime. This bird is actually a year-round resident. And with that, we actually found his nest, and it was right along this row of trees, right near where we caught him. So he does not go far throughout the year. Here he is in June, a lot more information, a lot more data points. July, some trips across the river and up north a little bit more. August, he's kind of same area. And then this is that nesting site. So we actually trapped him on this road, Goodrich Corner Road, hence the name Goodrich, and we would see him hanging out on these trees over here when we drive by on other days. And his nest was right in the pine tree right here off this field. So you can see why he spent all this time right in this clump of trees. He has a nest there. That's his home range, his territory. I just happened to be out there in the springtime, and I was driving this road, and I saw a bird with a mouse flying across the road, and sure enough, it was our bird. Had his backpack unit on clear as day, and I watched him fly right over to his nest and start feeding the birds that were there. So pretty crazy how he did not move very far from where we first encountered him, and he is still there. I checked on him. He was still, right in these two fields within the last couple of days. Actually, before that, this is the whole season. So all those data points. And with these units, you can actually see height above ground. So you can actually start to see the trees that he hangs out on. So this one tree right here might be his nesting tree, because he spends a lot of time up and down perched on that tree, and then all interspersed throughout different, the ground level, different trees, different heights that he's at. So a lot of useful information you can get from these units, and pretty cool data. And so Middlebury, that second bird we talked about, here's Middlebury, Vermont. We trapped him down here. And he was a migrant, so he never really settled down throughout the state. He did the grand tour of the entire county from north to south. He went in a circle. He actually did cross pretty close to where Goodrich was, and then he crossed the lake over into New York. And then around summertime, he started moving north. So you can see he starts moving, is making his way north towards the border. presumably going back to Canada. He made it within about 3 miles of the border and then turned around and flew 30 miles south. For whatever reason, he just didn't want to cross that day. He ended up back in a state park on the New York side of the border and hung out there for a few more days. And then we lost contact with him. So we assume he went back and crossed the border and we lost service. And actually, within the last 6 months, he checked in again and he ended up way, way up in northern Canada. And I actually have to minimize for a second because I wrote down where he ended up. So he was over 600 miles away from where we actually first encountered him, and he established a territory in the Canadian municipality of Bay James. So really, really far away from Middlebury and really, really far away from any sort of development or neighborhood, really. So this is where he ended up, completely different than where he started off in Vermont. You can see this is his territory for the summer, his home range. Not a lot going on in this area. There hardly seem to be any trees. There's some water, but this is where we presume he bred this summer. He's been offline for the last few months, so we're not really sure what happened with him. Sometimes with these units, they actually get a backlog of data, so they don't send you data continuously. When they hit a cell tower, they send a lot of data at once, and then they kind of work through that backlog. So we would think he'd be back down in the United States for the winter, but we're not entirely sure where this bird is right now. But you never know, he might drop a lot more data in the next few days, the next few months. It's hard to tell, but just two completely different birds. One is a year-round resident, one was a migrant. And that does align with what we know about these birds, that they will come down from Canada, they will be year-round. But interesting that this darker bird that we would assume would be in Canada for the summer did stick around Vermont. So definitely something to look at with those darker birds. For this winter season, we focused on another species in the area, rough-legged hawks. So this is a bird from one of our surveys. Another similar species to redtail, but they are an Arctic species. So there's definitely some differences. And so roughlegs, they're that Arctic species, like I said. This is where they are known to breed, the northern parts of Canada, northern Alaska, the Arctic, really, really far up north. They are reliant on lemmings, right? That Arctic rodent. So when there's a good lemming year, there's a lot of rough-legged hawks. Those birds tend to come down south in bigger numbers based on how many birds were breeding and survived the spring. They're Vermont winter residents, so you're not going to see them here in Vermont unless it's the winter time. And their winter territory can cover up to 6 square miles. So pretty large areas they're hanging out in the winter. And so they're a bird that's an Arctic species. They're adapted for living in the Arctic. And part of the year, the Arctic looks kind of like this. There's not a lot going on, not a lot of perching. They actually will nest right on the ground, and their coloration helps them to blend into this Arctic ground here. But then part of the year, it looks like this, right? So it's snow covered. And so they do come down south for our mild, comparatively, winters. Here's just a great, beautiful picture of a rough-legged hawk. That coloration, you can just picture it blending right into that Arctic background. They're called a rough-legged hawk, right? Because they've got rough legs. They've got feathers down their legs. There's their pair of snow pants, right? It helps them keep nice and warm. This is Bridport. She is our education raptor. She is a rough-legged hawk, and she's a great example of that bird. You can see those feathers down her legs. She's also got really, really tiny talons. Look, a bird this size, you'd think, here's a redtail in comparison. This is Bloomfield, another one of our ambassadors. Bloomfield has really big talons. Notice no feathers down her legs. But thinking about a bird in the winter, and if you've ever gone outside in the winter and you forget your gloves, the first thing that gets cold are your fingertips. So you lose a lot of heat out of your hands, your extremities. Little tiny talons are an adaptation to help them retain some heat in those talons that are otherwise unfeathered. They don't have feathers down their feet like a snowy owl does, so they are exposed to the elements. They're also the perfect size for catching those lemmings. So there you go, goes hand in hand. They're great at catching those little rodents. So that's Bridport. She actually is from Addison County. She was injured back in 2008, I believe. So she's been an ambassador bird with us for quite some time. She was hit by a car, pretty common thing for these birds. And then Bloomfield actually flew into some power lines. She's actually been in our care since 1994. So she's quite an old bird, but again, a rock star bird. And so she has a wing injury from her collision with the power line. So two fairly similar size birds. They hang out in the same kind of areas when they're here. So looking at how these birds interact while they're here in Vermont. And so to do that, we actually partnered with the Rough-Legged Hawk Project to put some units on those birds as well. So this is Neil's spiel about what he's looking for. But basically, he's been tracking these birds across their entire range, he has like 50 GPS units out right now, looking at these birds and their migration across their entire range. And so it overlapped again with our study. And so we decided to put out some units on birds in Vermont and see how they use our area while they're here. These are some of the eBird sightings before we went out to see that they're back. We're ready to go. Again, they congregate kind of right in the middle of Addison County. And so we planned our trapping days accordingly based on our surveys and then eBird reports. And so again, driving the roads, looking for these birds. This is from this winter, actually last week, we were out with Neil. We'd see a bird, he'd throw a trap, we'd move back, we'd wait, we'd watch the bird come down to the trap, and we were actually really successful really quickly. We actually got 5 birds in 3 days, which we were hoping for that kind of luck, and we ended up getting that kind of luck. Those birds came in pretty quickly. So this is one of the first rough legs we caught this season. A nice light morph female, a bird that came from this field right here. So again, this season, actually, there was some anecdotal evidence from passersby that it's been a really good rodent season in the area. So these birds were not super interested in coming down to our traps because they were fairly well fed. So it did take some time for the birds to think about, I should maybe fly down and see what's going on with that mouse down there. But you can see there was not a lot of snow cover at the time. So these birds were doing fairly well on their own. They were not super hungry. So they were not super interested in coming down to the traps, but eventually we did get them to come down. So again, the first thing we got was blood. Neil was doing a lot more with the blood than Bryce was, so he really wanted that sample quickly after the bird was captured to avoid being stressed and the adrenaline going and messing with the sample he was drawing. So again, little tiny vein, little tiny needle, cold hands, got blood really quick. He was also looking at what these birds are eating. So he was really interested in the prey residue that might be on these birds. So here he is swabbing the beak, swabbing the crop and the cheek and the skin on the inside of the mouth, and then swabbing the talons to see what these birds are eating. And he's going to give us all that data as well, because we're also interested in what are these birds eating while they're here in Vermont. And then he again did the standardized pictures, right? So the wing out, there's the color palette there, the back of the same wing. It was very windy while we were out, so he's trying to keep the board up while holding a bird and getting a nice in-focus picture. So that was pretty challenging, but he got some really nice shots. And then the nice spread tail of these birds. Just again, beautiful plumage on these birds when they're up close. Neil's also, he's doing so many things with these birds. He has this backdrop here, you can see with the grid on it. He has the camera spaced a certain distance, and from this image, he can actually have the computer analyze the area of the bird's wing. So that's information he was interested in. We are not so much interested in that, but he's got all that information as well from these birds. Here's that picture I was talking about earlier of these transmitters. You can see it's a backpack, right? So there's the GPS unit right there with the solar panel. There's the Teflon ribbon going over the shoulders. It sits over the bird's clavicle, and then it goes under the wing. He's moving the feathers out of the way so that the strap doesn't get tangled in the feathers. The front of the unit sits above the keel, so the breast of the bird, and then below the crop, so that it's got some muscle to sit on, but it doesn't interfere when the bird gets a meal and the crop expands. And it sits at the top of the back on the back side too, and allows for these birds to be able to fly and doesn't interfere with what they're doing, because it's designed to stay on them for the rest of their life. And he's actually got recoveries of birds from like 7 years out, and the units are completely intact, the ribbons are intact, and the bird is healthy and happy and living its best bird life. So really amazing what these units can do. And then here's his lab in the back of his truck. He was doing a lot of this blood work in the field, which was not fun when it was the coldest day of the year last year. We were out in the wind and blowing, but he was actually taking these samples. He would spin them down a centrifuge, he'd put them into these little slides here, and he actually had some fluorescent bacteria that he added to these slides, looking at birds' immune response to bacteria. So the idea was the blood cells would surround the bacteria, and you can actually see that back in the lab. So he was doing a lot of interesting stuff with these birds, above and beyond what we were looking at for our project, but really interesting stuff that he was doing. And I love slow-mo release videos. So here's another slow-mo release of one of our first birds out. This one might need to fast forward a little bit. Guess I can. Go. This is one of the lighter morph birds. Just beautiful birds, beautiful scenery, great place to be. There it goes. Somehow manages to go right between the power lines, which would have been a not so fun video if it collided with one of those lines. But there you go, right through, back out into the field where we first got the bird. So this is another bird we encountered, another light morph female bird, right from this field. This is a class 4 road that he went flying down, and I did not go down because I was in a Ford Transit van and didn't trust the snow tires. So he got the bird just a little farther down this road, and then right in this field is where this bird's actually been hanging out for the last few days, according to the transmitter. This is a dark morph bird that we got, a young male from that road. This bird actually got a satellite transmitter on it. So this bird will actually send data regardless of whether it's in contact with a cell tower. So this bird, as soon as it gets back to the breeding ground, we'll know where this bird is for the winter, or excuse me, for the summer and spring. Nice dark morph bird, younger bird, but still a real nice looking bird. That's the field. We actually encountered the landowner on this property. He said that he'd seen this exact bird on his game cameras going after a deer carcass that he left out for some coyotes. So we're actually curious to see if during the swabs, if we get any DNA from deer to see, is this bird actually scavenging on a carcass out in the field? So we're really interested to see if that comes back with what it's been eating. Here's Neil with his one-handed release technique, another slow-mo video of this darker morph juvenile bird. But really slow-mo. So there you go. Nice dark bird compared to the other ones we had. And he's flying right towards the field where the landowner said he had that deer carcass. So he's definitely hanging around that little area there. And he actually almost landed in the tree that he got caught out of. So they don't go too far when they don't want to. This is another lighter bird, one of the fourth bird we got last week. There's the unit right on the back of it. Right along the side of a pretty busy road. We weren't expecting to see a bird right on this road. We actually tried for a bird kind of a little ways down the road. We packed up because that bird didn't come down, and we were driving by, and this bird was right in the tree over the road, and they threw a trap, and we could barely get the cars turned around before the bird actually come down and was tangled up in the trap as cars were whizzing by this road. And this is the last bird we ended up getting. This is a really nice dark older bird. You can see the unit right there in the back. She was the feistiest of all the birds we handled. She was definitely putting up quite the fight. She nibbled a couple fingers in the process, but got the unit on her, and just a remarkable looking bird. The tail plumage is just amazing, incredible. Last slow-mo video, because she was a really cool bird, getting released out into the field. But just that striking dark color compared to the other ones. And then off into the field. And these birds immediately started sending us data, so we can access at least 3 of the birds right now fairly easily. And you can start to see some of their movements. So the bird up here in the corner does not move very far. This bird was, I believe, the last bird we just showed you. Again, hasn't moved very far from the last few days. This bird down at the bottom, though, is actually in New York already. So it flew south and then west and is near Albany. So did not stick around after we encountered it. And this is the bird that's right on that really busy road that's talking about, and has already gone south and into New York. So already out of our study area, but still really useful information for both us and for Neil and his project. And then just some pictures of other birds that Neil has trapped over the years. And then again, the variation of plumage of these birds. This is kind of a darker bird, but definitely look at the mottled coloration there. And this is some of the information that he's already gotten from his years of project. It's really really interesting information that he's gotten. So these are birds that he's banded and trapped out west and tracked. You can see they breed in Canada, and they all come back, actually Alaska here and Canada here, but they all come back pretty close together down there in the United States. Pretty interesting. And then these are the birds from kind of the more Midwest part of the country, way in northern Alaska, where they're breeding, and then they come back to, again, a really small area. So we're hoping to see that same kind of information from these birds that we have out now in Vermont. And so for the rest of our project, we are still hoping to put some more units out on some red tails this season. With everything, we have a little bit of delay, but we're hoping to get at least a couple more units out. They're not GPS units like the ones that I've been talking about. They're actually radio telemetry, so that will require us to go out and actually track these birds. So this is the unit here, a little bit smaller, and this is the Yagi antenna. We'll be actually out trying to track these birds down from the signal that they emit from this transmitter. So hopefully getting some more on red-tailed hawks. Hopefully we're going to collect some feathers from these birds and get them analyzed by Landmark College to see if they're male or female. To get that sex thing down, so we have that information as well, and then track these birds through March at least. And so oftentimes we wonder, well, why do we study such a common species like a red-tailed hawk, or even rough-legs are fairly common, but there is so much more we can still learn from them. And it's one of those things where you want to learn a lot about these species before they become an uncommon or rare species. Because red tails are so iconic and they're easily identified and recognizable, there's a lot of engagement from the public. So we can get people excited about these birds. We can then look to help protect habitat that these birds use and other birds use. Red-tailed hawks are seen in the same fields as harriers and snowy owls and rough-legged hawks. So things that benefit these birds can also benefit these other more unique, sometimes less common birds. There's all sorts of information about where these birds are migrating to, so it's great to protect where they are in the state, but where are they going that's important as well. So for Middlebury especially, he ended up in a lot of state parks, and that area is luckily already protected, but where are these birds stopping during their migration, and how can we protect those areas as well? And then again, that landowner education and engagement all funnels back into our mission of education and inspiring people to care about the environment. And we've had so many conversations with landowners out in the field, like, what is that bird? What are you doing? And just getting those people to really think about these birds. And, you know, you could spend the whole day talking to them about the things that they've seen, and really exciting and interesting things that they're learning from what we're doing. We learn from what they're doing as well. This is just an interesting paper that I stumbled across, and that's actually Neil Paprocki, the guy we were out with for rough-legged hawks. And it's showing that these birds are changing their habits as a result of climate change. And so birds, they're altering their migrations. In some cases, birds aren't migrating anymore. They're just kind of sticking around where they're going. And so this paper that he put out recently was analyzing those kinds of data points of bird count, backyard bird counts and hawk watch data, and looking at how these birds and their migrations are changing as a result of the climate change and things like that. So our data might start to show and feed into what we've already been seeing when these birds are altering their behaviors as a result of what's going on. And with that, there's just a nice sunset from out in Addison County. You know, it's a great place to visit if you haven't already. It's a hot spot for birds, and you could spend a whole day out there and see all sorts of cool things. And with that, any final questions or comments?
There was one question a little while back in the chat. Somebody wanted to know more about what method you use to trap the birds.
The method used to trap the bird, yeah. So driving around with those balchat traps, we would look for a bird that's fairly close to the road, sometimes sitting on a tree across the road, or the edge of a field not very far off the road. Ideally, it's not a very busy road, kind of those back dirt roads, and looking at getting the trap on the same side of the road as the birds. They don't have to cross the road. hopefully there's no fences around, power lines. And so placing that trap with that mouse in a way that the bird can see it from its perch. These birds, they're sit and wait predators, so they will often be sitting on a tree waiting for dinner to run by. And so getting the bird so they can see the trap, and just hopefully the mouse moves enough that the bird gets interested and comes down to investigate and then try and catch that mouse. So there's a lot of waiting, getting the trap in a good spot, backing up so that we can still see the trap, but the bird can't quite see us, and then waiting for it to get really tangled up in the trap, and then running to catch it before it does too much damage to itself or the trap. And then the whole process from there.
Thanks. If there are other questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and fire away.
Mary here. The coloration of the rough-legged hawks are it's just amazing. I'd never seen one up close like that, and you could see how it would be how it would blend in so well in its breeding grounds, so modeled. But
Yeah,
they're stunning birds.
they are. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's just exquisite.
Yeah, and it's even better up close. So it's just wow.
Imagine.
That bird is just
It's a piece of art. It's a work of art, rather.
For sure.
Yeah, and I was very interested in the vertical and the data you were collecting about the verticality,
Mhm.
where the red-tailed hawk was perching in trees, and that was quite interesting, getting that 3D perspective as well as also just all the areas that it inhabited around that. That's fascinating. And
you wouldn't think about it till you really start putting it like this. Like, yeah, that very easily could be a tree. That's the field, that's the tree, that's soaring potentially. Yeah, it's really unique.
And it also struck me too how important that copse of trees was. And landowner. Thank goodness, the landowners do leave, for some forested landscape like that, and which is pretty critical.
Yeah, and we were actually finding, so on those really cold, windy days, that a lot of these birds were tucked in on the south side of like clumps of trees, just like this, sheltering from what was going on. Yeah, so this is actually a business right here. It's like a landscaping. He's got rock piles and things. He's got a little pond where geese hang out, but he's left this little patch of woods. And like you said, it's critical that this patch exists. He said he has barred owls that hang out there. We told him about this red tail that hangs out there now. So, hopefully that patch stays there.
I can see how that would be so important then to engage with the landowners, because you're confirming. I mean, if they're interested already to begin, that you're halfway there, but then they can see what you're actually demonstrating, about who that this is, say, a resident bird, this is it, and might be more motivated to keep it, keep the landscape as it is.
Definitely. And that's why we tried so hard to connect with these landowners and say, like, it's amazing how many people are already interested in birds. They come out and say, guess what birds I've seen already? What bird are you looking for? And like, oh, I've seen that bird. Yeah. And we say, okay, keep an eye out for this bird now that we have it out there. And they love it. So that engagement, like you said, is just critical.
Yep. Keeps the rodent population down too.
Any other questions for Jim?
That was very, very interesting.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining this evening and this really informative presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.